Hey guys, what's up? It's River, and today we're looking at my Fuji X100F. It's a really unique camera that I've had for just under a month, and I think there's really nothing else like it on the market right now. It has built-in film emulations, a vintage style body, and a super fast autofocus. So let's go over some of my favorite features on this camera and what I think makes this camera super unique. And also, just to let you know, there's a link in the description below for the best pricing on this particular Fuji. The kind of deals you can get for Fuji cameras on Amazon, you really can't get at Best Buy or your local camera store. So the first thing you probably notice is the body on this camera. This is a really interesting, unique visual style. It's supposed to be reminiscent of old school vintage cameras all the way back from the 40s. And even if you weren't alive back then, I definitely wasn't alive in the 40s, but it kind of just makes you feel nostalgic for like an old world. And just the whole philosophy behind the camera isn't like brand new, modern, sharp. It's supposed to kind of make you feel nostalgic, kind of take you back to an older time, to like a filmic time. So if you're someone that really likes using film, but maybe just doesn't want to bother with developing film anymore, this is a really good camera to think about. Right off the bat, the thing that I absolutely love on this camera is that it has these really nice clicky dials. The camera dials are actually set up in the same way that they would have been set up on older 60s and 40s cameras. You have a shutter dial right at the top. You do have a front dial and a back dial like you would on modern cameras, so you can customize those to change your shutter and aperture. But really what makes this camera fun is being able to put your hand on the lens and manually changing the lens. That's super fun. And I know I probably sound like a total nerd right now, but yeah, there's something like just kind of fun about putting your hand on the actual lens and changing the aperture manually, and then actually looking down, seeing the shutter button and actually changing that shutter button to be like, okay, I'm at 125, 250, 500. It just kind of takes you back to this really hands-on manual style of photography. I would best describe it as the comparison between vinyl and digital. Now, I hope I haven't scared you with the whole, it's a manual camera, this camera is like all vintage and old. Like, it does have a lot of modern features, and it does have very, very customizable buttons. If you're someone that does not want to use manual buttons and like change your dials in like the old school way, that's totally fine. It has a front dial, a back dial, and a function button right up here that you can program to do anything. And on top of that, the focus ring here can also be programmed to do things like digitally zoom in, change film simulations. This is a very, very customizable camera. What I personally do is I actually customize all the buttons to fit my shooting style because I tend to shoot on modern cameras, but I just like the look of this camera. So if you fall in the same category as me, you can customize all these buttons to fit your shooting style, and you can get the beautiful look of this camera without having to worry about manual controls if you don't like to use them. So that's another feature I really like about this camera, is the fact that it's so customizable. Okay, so another thing that I love about this camera is actually the prime lens on it. Now, prime lenses have a few advantages. One, obviously the size. This camera has a very, like from here, it's just about 2 inches of thickness. Like, that's really good, and it keeps the camera light. Second, prime lenses are super sharp because they're simpler glasses. They don't zoom in. A $500 prime lens will generally look better or as good as like a $1,500 or $2,000 zoom lens. And the great thing about a prime lens is that it actually forces you to get better. When I started photography, I only shot with prime lenses because it forced you to learn how to compose. You couldn't just turn a dial, zoom into something, and be like, great, I got my shot. You have to move with your feet. You have to really get into interesting angles and compose. So if you're someone that wants to get better with photography, a camera like this is great because the prime lens will force you to get better with photography. So that's another feature I love about this camera. This lens is really killer, and it just looks amazing. So if you're someone that really cares about how sharp your images are, definitely look into this camera. This prime lens makes this camera so much better. And also, it's a super fast prime lens. This prime lens goes all the way up to aperture 2.0. The world's fastest lens is 0.98. So you're getting a 2.0, which is only about a stop and a half of light. So if you want to do low light work, this is fantastic. 2.0 actually looks really good in portraits. You get this beautiful shallow depth of field. You get this really dreamy look to it at 2.0. And if you want for street photography, 5.6, this lens is super sharp, has great depth of field, and with the super fast autofocus, this is the perfect lens for street photography. So speaking of street photography and autofocus, this camera has amazing autofocus. It has 91 points of autofocus. To give you guys context, a full-blown DSLR like the T7 or the 80D only has 45 points of autofocus. This has 91. That's almost double. It's a little, just a little under double, but that's really amazing. This camera has great autofocus. I genuinely feel so confident using this camera when it comes to autofocus. A lot of times I do street photography with this camera, and if I see something going by, if I see a cyclist or like just someone walking across the street, I will literally just flip it on and just take a photo. And generally, like 99.99999% of the time, it's gonna get them in focus. This camera, I think has maybe missed 1 or 2 shots, and I've been using for about a month now. This camera is super duper impressive when it comes to autofocus. So if you're someone that's doing fast-paced work, street photography, or maybe you just don't ever wanna have to bother with manual focus, this camera is super good with autofocusing when it comes to photos. And with video, not so much. The video autofocus really is very hit and miss. It's not the greatest. It's 2 different systems. And if you do want a video camera that's similar to this, I'd recommend the Fuji X-T3 or the X-T30. Those are fantastic cameras with pretty decent autofocus. And if you don't think either of those cameras would work for you, check out the link in the description below. We have a full list of cameras below that you can check out. So yes, super impressed with the autofocus in this camera. It's fast and reliable, and I really, really trust it. While we're on the subject of how impressive this camera is, this is probably the most impressive thing about this camera. The noise performance in this camera is like unheard of. It's not quite Sony level, but here's what I mean. At 12,800 ISO, this camera is completely clean. Like, there's really no noise. It's super smooth. There's no color noise. There's no noticeable grain. It's really, really clean. For the Canon DSLR, like a 5D Mark III or an 80D, as soon as you go to 2000 ISO, that's in high ISO territory. You go to 3200 ISO, you're gonna get noise, you're gonna get color noise. The image is starting to fall apart. A camera like this at 2000 ISO in video is totally fine. A camera like this in photos, even at 5000, 12,800 ISO is totally fine. This camera has something called the X processor in it, which Fuji is very, very well known for. That X processor gives you very low noise at very high ISOs. So you're always getting silky, smooth, filmic, buttery, like just clean, velvety images with this camera all the time. So if you're doing portraits or doing things with skin a lot, you don't want to have grain show up, you don't want to have noise in people's skin, you don't want to have noise in your landscapes. This camera is always keeping things clean, especially if you're doing black and white work. Black and white work looks best when it's completely noiseless, it's very velvety, you can really see into the shadows, really see into the highlights, and you really don't want to be using a noisy camera when it comes to work like that. So I would really say when it comes to noise performance, this camera is 10 out of 10. It's not a low light monster like the Sony cameras, which at 51,800 ISO or like 64,000, those cameras are clean. This camera is very, very good in low light, but what really, really shines is that it has virtually no noise, because the Sony cameras do have noise. You get a little bit of texture, you get a little bit of grain, but the way the Sony cameras are done, it looks filmic. But here you get literally zero texture, zero grain. It doesn't even look like you're shooting at a high ISO. It's a super clean image. So my last favorite feature about this camera is actually the viewfinder. Now, why the viewfinder? Because a lot of cameras have viewfinders. Here's why. This camera is made to look like a vintage camera. It's made to kind of help make you feel like you're shooting on film. It's got this beautiful prime lens and just kind of lends to this overall experience of like old school photography, a very intimate feel. And if it didn't have a viewfinder, it just wouldn't work. And this is a fantastic viewfinder. It's an optical viewfinder and has an OLED screen that flips up when you put your face up to it, which you can choose between the two. So it's really, really useful. If you're someone that likes to look through the eye hole and just be like, that's what I'm getting. Okay, cool, that's nice, that's nice. You can do that. And if you want to see exactly what your camera's getting, because I'm not special, I have so many times where like I've taken a photo, I'm like, this looks great, and I check the screen, I'm like, wait, my shutter speed was too high, my aperture was too high, like I've just messed it up. And it's really nice to just be able to look through this thing, have an OLED viewfinder that just flips up, and you're like, oh, that's exactly what I'm getting. Because I don't particularly like shooting off the back of LCD screens when it comes to cameras like this. Like I want that intimate feel, putting it up to my face. So the fact that there's like an LCD screen built into my viewfinder is just a huge plus and makes my life that much easier. Just make sure that I don't lose any shots. This, honest to God, will make your photos come out 20 to 30% better simply based on the fact that you're not messing up any of your shots. And overall, I just love how intimate this viewfinder feels, and a camera like this just would not be complete without a viewfinder like this. This viewfinder really makes the whole package complete. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed watching me nerd out about my Fuji camera. There's a link in the description below for the absolute best deal on this camera. The kind of deals you can get on Amazon for cameras, you simply cannot get at Best Buy or your local camera store. So I really recommend checking that out. If you have any questions whatsoever about this camera or other cameras in general, hit me up in the comments down below and I'll make sure to get back to every single one of you. As always, be sure to like and subscribe for future content. Until next time.